Everybody, welcome to my channel. Today a tutorial where I'm going to show you two different projects using the same napkin. So here's the napkin that I use. It's called Aquarelle Meadow Napkin, and the two projects that I created. Now if you can't get this exact napkin, which is a favorite and is lovely, what you want is a napkin that has a white background. And that'll allow you to do both of the applications that I'm doing. So I'm going to do one of these on a 6x6 folded card and one on a 7x10 art journal page. Now the first one, I'm going to use the napkin pretty much as it is, one of the quadrants, and there are 4 quadrants on this napkin, 4 identical pictures. And this one, I'm just playing around with the orientation. My thought process here is to cut it apart and reassemble it how I see fit. I could have it in the center, I could have it up the one side. You can play around with the composition as much as you want. Now the stems and the leaves on this, you can leave as is, or you can cut out the flowers and assemble it however you wish, and then paint in any of the stems or leaves that are necessary. And I do a bit of both. So here I am playing around with potential composition, and I take pictures along the way. So I'm unsure where that one's going, the 7x10, but I'm going to work on the card base. Now here is a wood panel. It's a 6x6 wood panel. I picked this up at the Dollar Tree just recently, and you could be doing the same project on that panel and it would make a lovely collection. I bought 4 of them and I plan to do flowers on all of them and have them hung in a group. So I'm taping off the edge to keep the backside clean. And now to add interest, I'm taking this darkroom door script stamp and stamping it with black archival ink, just all over script. Because the napkin is white, you are going to see all this script coming through. That's going to be the added detail on this card. This card is extremely simple, but very, very effective. Now, I'm just using the heat tool to set the ink before I put the fluid matte medium on and decoupage down the napkin. And you can see how the napkin goes translucent, and you see the script detailing come out. And I love that. It's a very simple, easy effect. Once dry, I'm just cutting off the excess and then making sure that the edges are all perfectly glued down. And I'm giving a good coat of matte medium on the top because I want this to be a non-porous surface. Now, I love the watercolor effect, but I want to bump up the color. So instead of using acrylic paint, I'm using my Inktense blocks. If you don't have Inktense blocks, you can use the pencils. You could use any watercolor medium, watercolor pencils, watercolors, pigment powders, what have you. I'm wetting it down and just dropping it in. I just want to boost the color a little bit. Now I have them all swatched out, so I'm matching the colors as closely as I can. And if you're not a person who swatches, that's the benefit of swatching it out, because now you know what color to use and it's an easy find. So I'm using water-soluble product here because I want to maintain the watercolor look. Now, the Inktense pencils are ink, and they are permanent when dry. But if you were using a watercolor product that wasn't, would need to spray that and with a fixative, especially before you would varnish it. I'm not going to varnish the card, but if you were doing this on a canvas or uh, a wood panel, like I showed you earlier, you definitely do that. So here I do kind of drop in the ink tints. I get it on my brush, and I'm using a wetter and wetter brush and just kind of dropping it in to get more of that watercolor look. I also go in and I dilute some white gesso just to get some more variation and change the tone of the colors. So I did have a little bit of bleed out on there, right there. And I go back and I just touch it up with a little bit of gesso, and you can't really tell. I may have benefited from, I had covered it with matte medium, and I'm thinking that that was going to be good enough. But I'm thinking it would have been better to maybe put a coat of clear gesso on. So here I'm putting the white gesso, and it's very diluted, but I just want to add some highlights and get that different tone in on the page. Now, the wash that I'm doing, the color that I'm applying, pushes back the script, but you can still see it, although it's very faint where the flowers are, and then darker on the background. Now, if you don't have water-soluble products, you can dilute acrylic paint and do a wash with it, as opposed to putting it on more heavily, which I do on the art journal page that's coming up. I'm quite happy with how this has turned out. And there, you can see the napkin. You can look at the napkin to see the colors and where the highlights and the lowlights are. I like adding gold even on art journal pages, but I really like it on the cards. They just make them a little bit more special. If you get a big blob, you can lift it off with a baby wipe. Gold sometimes leaves a little bit of a mark where it was, and you can't totally get it off, but so I went to my It's About Time sentiment pack, and I picked this one, Time is Precious, Waste It Wisely. And I'm bubble cutting part of it, getting rid of a lot of the white. I don't want to see the white on this. I want to see the background. So I want to eliminate the amount of white that I have. And I separated the quote because it can read by itself, time is precious, or it can read together. And it causes your eye to start at the top and go down. The bottom part of the sentiment here that I'm gluing down, there was some wicking with the watercolor, and I'm gluing the sentiment on top of that to hide what I couldn't disguise any other way. Now I'm using Archival ink with a sponge, and I'm just edging the page. This is giving a very soft look, again, that goes with the soft watercolor look. And there we have one finished card or art journal piece, because you could do the same thing in an art journal or wood panel or a canvas. So let's get started on the 7x10 Canson Mixed Media art journal page using the same napkin. Now I played with the orientation. I'm thinking, okay, I've got these butterflies, I've got a sentiment, and I'm just, taking pictures of various orientations. Not sure which way I'm going, but I've decided I'm going to go with a blue background. Now, again, this napkin is white. It's going to go translucent on the parts in between that I don't cut out. So I'm mixing Naples yellow and light blue permanent with white gesso And I'm just spreading that with a makeup sponge. Now, my page is gessoed, so that helps the colors blend when I'm doing it wet on wet. Now, the blues that are in the napkin were a little different. So I grabbed cobalt blue and I'm adding it, and it's more closely that blue that's in the napkin. You remember, you want the different components to work together. I'm taking this big wreath stencil. This is the 6-inch one. And I want some of the leaves, and I'm doing that with the cobalt blue. And I love how this dark blue looks with on top of the light blue. Then I have onion blossom, and I'm putting that on with white. And first I go with white gesso, but it's not as opaque as I want, so I switch to white acrylic paint. I just want this to show up a little bit more. Right now I'm interested in making a interesting background. Lots of detail, lots of pattern, and I'm loving how this looks. And I will remember this combination, the color combination, which I love, and the combination of stencils here to use for another purpose, for another page. And that's why if you have it in your art journal, you can flip through and go, oh yeah, I remember when I did that. Those worked really well. I wanted to add some script here, but I didn't want to use the script stamp. So I have this, I believe it's called Believe, but I'll put it in the description box. And I'm using Archival ink with a blending brush. And I will link that and the stencils in the description box. And I'm just putting that over. So you're getting script. It's a very soft, it's not as black, because I wanted to keep this fairly soft at this point. And then in my decision making, I was looking at the pictures and I decided that I'm going to put a grouping of 4 of the flowers on the one side and 2 on the other. And as you can tell, I've cut out a lot of it. Some of the flowers are by themselves. And if I need a stem or leaves, I'm going to paint those on, because my plan for these flowers is to paint more painterly effect with globs of paint more. Now, I don't want to see the background coming through. Like, I don't want the blue to go through that yellow flower because it's going to turn it green. So I'm using a makeup sponge and just applying a light coat of gesso. So when I glue it down, the napkin colors are going to stay more true. Now that's really important if you aren't going to paint it, or you are only just going to do a wash like we did on the other one. And you can do that. I'm going to put a heavier application of paint and actually change and deepen the colors. So it's less important. But when I'm at this stage, I don't know necessarily where I'm going to go. So it keeps my options open. So here I'm taking acrylic paint and I've matched it as closely as I can. And here I've added Hooker's green, and I put some of the Naples yellow in it. And I'm putting it on very loosely. I'm adding stems. You're going to see me adding some leaves. Here I'm adding leaves. I put some gesso down, and then I'm kind of globbing paint. And to do this, I either use a very small round brush or filbert brush or a liner pen brush, as I'm using right here, but I do switch it to another brush in a minute. So I'm putting on globs of white gesso first, and then I'm taking the paint that I've matched to the colors and I'm putting it on top. And by painterly, I mean it's fairly abstract. It's not true. And I do want to deepen the colors. So in this tutorial, I've showed you two different ways of colorizing the flowers. And again, you can look back at the napkin to see the colors, to see where the highlights and the lowlights are, and use that as a guide, even if you're changing the colors. And I could do that. That red poppy at the top, I could have turned it more magenta color by putting a coat of gesso on and then just mixing my own color. So you just use the napkin as a guide, and then you can alter it to fit your composition and color scheme. I like how all the flowers turned out. The least, I like the least how the poppy turned out. It just was lost some of the definition. I needed to maybe pay attention more to the details, but it's all good. I really like how this flower turned out. And I just kind of put the gesso on, and then I'm adding the colors and then adding more of the magenta. And it's just, you have all the different shades and tones of that color. And that's what really makes it. Now I'm shading with black acrylic paint around the edge. And I'm doing it right now because I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm thinking that something is missing. Something's not quite right with this. But I'm unable to pinpoint it at this stage of the game. And then I decide that because the flowers got darker, I needed some contrast. I needed something more. So I grabbed my Prussian blue and this linked tiles stencil, and I've added some stenciling in 3 places. And I really like how that just seemed to balance everything out. And then I'm shading with that same Prussian blue around the outside edge. Pushes back the black a little bit and just makes everything work together. So now I'm auditioning the different sentiments, and I grab my Through the Garden Gate sentiment pack. I have this one, Down the Garden Path. And while the text looked big, I'm thinking, yeah, it is too big. So I start cutting it out and auditioning the ones that I think fit. And I don't want a lot of the white. So I tend, especially when it's script, tend to bubble cut. So I'm, going between the two sentiments, looking how it is. And you have to make it fit what you actually have on the page. I like that. And then I get the idea I'm going to take the in from the other sentiment, because when you have the sentiment pack, you don't have to use it exactly as I've given it to you. You can cut from many of them and make your own sentiment. So we have this one, and then we can go up and down. So again, I tend to take pictures of it and I compare. And, in the end, there isn't a right or wrong. There's just how you like it. That there was some of that linked tiles there that just was showing up in the wrong place underneath the word. So I just took a little bit of gesso and knocked it back. I grabbed my Posca pen and very sketchily am just lightly outlining the flowers. I could have taken my General's charcoal pencil and done this, but I thought I'm going to give this a try with the Posca pen. And it worked, but you have to have a very light hand, and I didn't always do it. On this flower, I really like how this turned out. And some of them I made a little bit too solid of a line. I might have done a better job with the thinner Posca pen, and I'll have to look into purchasing that one. The Posca pens are permanent when they're dry, but once you put them down, when you put them down, you can remove them with a baby wipe if you want to. And I'm not trying to get a solid line around the petals. I just want a little bit of line work, just to define the flowers a little bit more. So we took the napkin and we painted on top of it, altering the color to some degree, and then added the line work, which wasn't there. Whereas the other one is very close resemblance to the napkin where it started and where it ended. I'm removing the tape, loving the look, but I did take and I used this onion blossom stencil and went on top of some of that link tile stencil just to get rid of any hard edges. And I'm splattering with gold here. Should have done that before I took off the painter's tape. So there is the 7x10 art journal page, and there is the 6x6 card. So two different projects using the same napkins, two different looks. One's very, very simple, uses a few products. One uses a few more, but it's quite easy too when you know how. I hope you give this a try. If you like seeing multiple projects using one napkin, leave me a comment in the description box below. Thanks so much for joining me. Now go get creative.